Heart and Soul, The Story of America and African Americans by Kadir Nelson. And here we have a picture of a young woman teaching her father how to read. Chapter 5 is Reconstruction. All men are created equal, says the Great Declaration. And now a great act attests this verity. Charles Sumner, U.S. Senator, Massachusetts. You want to start?
Yeah. When the slaves were set free, they didn't have nothing. The old masters didn't give them nothing. All those folks had a mighty hard time. They had to start from scratch. In slavery time, it was against the law for most black folks to own property, to vote, or to read. All of a sudden, we had to find a way to make it on our own. A few politicians had the bright idea that black people should be sent to Africa. All 4 million of us,
U.S. President. Or
no,
all
4
million
of us. President Lincoln.
Oh, okay.
President Lincoln even seriously considered the idea before the end of the war. Even though some black folks made the trip, there was no way the government would pay to send all those people back across the ocean. Besides, we didn't know Africa anymore than we knew the south of France. We were born and raised in America. We were Americans by right. In America is where we should stay. Southern white folks had to start over too. Much of the South was destroyed by the war. Cities like Richmond and Atlanta were burned, abandoned, and looted by the soldiers. The great wealth of the proud South was gone. Deserted Southern properties were given away. The Confederate dollar wasn't worth a cup of... This is a picture of freed men. So wasn't worth a cup of red Georgia clay. Young folks used to dig that money out of the garbage and play with it. To help the Southerners and freed slaves get on their feet, the government planned to rebuild the South with a series of acts called Reconstruction. The Freedmen's Bureau, which oversaw Reconstruction efforts, gave a few former slaves each about 40 acres of deserted land to cultivate and live on. Problem was, no one told the freedmen that the land was already owned by someone else. When the true owners of the land came back after the war, President Johnson ordered the freed slave to give him the land back. Some black folks moved to the west and claimed the land and started over, or up north to work in cities. Most stayed and like Pop went to work for their old masters as sharecroppers. Sharecropping was an arrangement where workers would split the profit of a crop with the owner of the land. Old master paid for the seeds, supplies, equipment, and living expense, and told Pap he had to pay him back for his share of expenses at the end of the year. After Pap settled his debit to the owner, he would get the rest of the money owed him for the crop. It sounded like a fair deal, but old master was a crook. When he and Pop settled at the end of the year, he always found a way not to pay Pop. He subtracted the cost of the seed, food, housing, and such from what he owed, padding it here and there, figuring, until it ended up with Pap owing him. Even if he wanted to, Pap couldn't say a word. The unwritten but well-understood rule was never contradict a white person, no matter what. That was reason enough to find yourself strung up from a tree. The best Pap could do was try and make it back the next year, but he never did, honey. Sharecropping was a sneaky way of keeping black folks in the fields without having to pay them. Wasn't much different from slavery. With the end of slavery, millions of former slaves had the right to learn to read, write, and figure. The Freedmen's Bureau helped set up and oversee free public schools and colleges. all around the South. Scores of northern teachers flooded down to teach all the newly freed slaves and poor white folk who weren't able to go to school before the war. Black men also gained the right to vote, and with it they put some of our own folks in office, even sent a few to the House of Representatives. These were very big steps, but our progress didn't come without a price. The time after the war was terrible for black folks. Even though we could vote and go to school, most of us were poor and illiterate. Union soldiers occupied southern towns to keep the peace, but didn't do much to protect black people from new groups of mean whites like the Ku Klux Klan, who threatened us all year long. And here is a picture of Pap sharecropping. And on the next page, there's a picture of the burning cross was a warning to black folks meant to keep them in their place. Can I read the whole chapter?
Sure.
I like this. To stop black folks from voting, Klansmen marched in front of their homes wearing white sheets over their heads, shooting out the windows and burning homes to the ground, or worse, dragging black folks out of their homes to lynch them. The law didn't do a thing to stop it. Shoot. Some of the men were wearing the sheets were lawmen. It was their way of keeping us in our place, wherever that was supposed to be. They couldn't stand seeing us trying to be equal to whites. They were convinced that they were somehow superior to black people. My grandmother used to call it the sickness. Whatever it was just plain mean, honey. Lord knows how those folks could fix it in their minds to do the things they did to get us back then. It was a miracle we made it through. After a while, the government seemed to just give up on Reconstruction. Federal troops were sent back home, and state governments wrote new laws called Jim Crow laws that divided everything by race. Restaurants, libraries, theaters, schools, markets, drinking fountains, you name it. There were now two Americas, one white and one black, and the South slowly fell backward into something that looked a lot like slavery. Sharecroppers were stuck in the fields in debt to landowners. Black people lived in fear of violence, and the sharecroppers were and the vote was pushed out of reach with poll taxes, which people had to pay in order to vote, which were too high for most black folks. New laws like the grandfather clause said only people whose grandfathers had voted in prior elections could vote, which obviously made it impossible for black folks to vote. The North had won the Civil War, but the South, it won Reconstruction. And the next page is Cowboys and Indians, Native Americans, and Western Negroes. Pop and Aunt Sarah.
And we'll read that next time. Thanks for watching.